Hey everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Flynn. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm joined here by illustrator, motion designer, animator, Ben Marriott.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Flynn. It's great to be here again.
It's so good. This is your third time on the show.
Number 3.
Which is super cool. And hi everyone in the chat. Tushar, we are starting. How exciting.
Hello, Shah.
What's up? And Lance, hey, nice to see everybody in here. So if you're watching live on adobeapaclive.com, you can jump into the chat and ask questions. We're going to be here for about an hour. We'll see how we go with questions we can ask during if they're nice and easy. And if we have some more complex questions about process or things that might have a bit of a longer answer, we'll take a little bit of a break in the middle and maybe at the end as well to answer some questions. So you can log in with your Adobe ID to ask your questions. So that's just your Creative Cloud login details in the top right-hand corner, and you can ask those questions. If you're watching on YouTube on demand, feel free to let us know in the comments below. If you do have any questions, we'll check it out. And also suggestions for future content, because we're creating heaps more stuff. So yeah, welcome everybody, and welcome Ben, most importantly. So perhaps for those that haven't seen you on your awesome YouTube channel.
Thank you.
Or also here on a previous Adobe Live, maybe you could give us a bit of a elevator pitch of who is Ben Marriott in 2019.
All right, in 2019, I'm Ben Marriott. I'm actually living a Davida Loca at the moment as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yes,
Wow.
it's inspired by Ricky Martin.
Oh my gosh.
Motion designer or illustrator, animator. I'm kind of maybe thinking about using that phrase more. They're the same thing, I guess.
Right.
So I'm a freelancer. So I started with a background in design and illustration, and then about 4 or so years ago, I got my love affair with animation began, and I've been making all those designs and illustrations move, and that's what brought me here.
So it's keeping you busy too, huh?
Exactly.
There's a lot going on at the moment. Hey, Festus in the chat. Yeah, it'd be great to know where you guys are from as well, everyone in the chat room. So say hello, let us know where you're from. Festus from Wellington. It's always good to see you here. So we're going to get stuck into some stuff. Maybe you could give us a bit of an idea of what we're going to be looking at today.
Sure. Well, here is the final animation that we're looking to be creating some certain elements of.
Awesome.
Actually, that is not the final animation. I've jumped ahead. This is the final animation that we'll be making. So we're going to be specifically looking at the animated textures in this animation. So I'm going to go through my process from creating the original assets in Illustrator, texturing them in Photoshop, importing them into After Effects, and then building some textures of our own using some existing Photoshop brushes and some photos we've taken as well.
Awesome. And this is an evil drumstick.
This is an evil chicken drumstick. I find drawing chicken is kind of like my crutch that I lean on when I don't know what exactly to draw. So I drew a piece of chicken. I thought, to spice it up a bit, give him some devil horns and some freaky eyes.
I'm getting some Adventure Time kind of vibes from this chicken.
There's a lot of Adventure Time influence in my work. A lot of faces on things that shouldn't have faces, and, and personalities that those faces shouldn't have.
That's cool. And for the kids out there, this is a CRT monitor, I believe. Which is a computer we used to use.
We used to use this back in the old days, back in the old 20th century.
Back in the day, yeah.
All right.
Tushar from India, that's cool. Hey Riley, Kia, Melbourne. Riley's going to see you at Node. So that's, just before we jump in, that's Node Fest, isn't it?
That's right.
Down in Melbourne, which is we should give a shout out to that because you're speaking.
Yeah,
is that
that's
right?
So
Sweet.
Node Fest is a motion design festival conference it's in Melbourne at the end of every year. So yeah, I'm speaking at this year's one. I think it's run for 4 years. Last year was the first time I went, and I had an absolute blast. I made heaps of connections. When I went there, I knew one other person in this industry that I hadn't worked with.
Oh, wow.
And now, I know dozens of folks. So, if you're in Australia or nearby, want to meet more people in the motion industry, come on down. It's a great time.
Yeah.
A wonderful after party as well.
And I think those videos are often available online as well, so you can see the previous years.
Absolutely. They're all online on the NodeFest YouTube.
Yeah, and surprise, it's really high quality videos. So.
Yes, of course. Good graphics as well.
Yeah, great graphics.
You never get better intro graphics than at a motion design conference.
That's cool. So we've got some people from Melbourne as well. Super cool. Nathan's from Chicken. Super cool. Hey, Reese from the US. It's nice to see you. It's the time in the US right now. Okay, great. Well, why don't we get started? And just a reminder, everyone, you can ask questions as we go.
Of course. So let's dive in to the Illustrator file where it all began. So I created this in Illustrator. I don't have the particular need for this to be a vector illustration for the animation that we're going to be doing. A lot of times in animation, you might want to have a vector assets to begin with, so you can animate paths and you can scale infinitely and those types of things. That's not so much important for this animation because our animation is relatively static. But Illustrator just creates a really good sort of base to build up geometric shapes, and it's easy to change colors, and it's a good tool for that. So you'll also notice on the right, we have a large layer panel here. I have always, in all my software, the layer panel as tall as I can possibly extend it. And we have all of our elements separated onto each layers. So I've separated each element that I want to texture individually onto a separate layer, and then I've labeled them. So I've called this one, if we start from the bottom, we've got base bottom, base mid, and base top. So these are just these three sections of different colors. Because when we get into Photoshop, we're going to want to treat each of these layers separately. And it makes sense to label them all at the beginning. It doesn't take that much time. It might take a couple of minutes to label all of these. And you'll see these labels run through our whole project. And it's always good to start your file as organized as possible because it's only going to get more chaotic from then. I've never seen a file get more organized the more it goes through, unless something chaotic happens and we need to, do some surgery and really pull it together, which has happened.
Yes, we love it when people come on here and they label their files.
Label their files.
It's very important.
And if you work with an animator, if you're an illustrator, if you give them a layered file or even just labeled, they will love you. If you make someone's job easier, they will, they'll want to work with you forever and ever.
It's good advice.
So, from here, we're going to start texturing in Photoshop, but we need to export that as a PSD. So to do that, we go to File, Export, and we go to Export As. And then we want to make sure Photoshop is ticked down here. And just click Export. I might rename it so I don't overwrite anything. No, don't want to replace that. I've already done that once. And twice. Let's just add that. All right, and we want to make sure...
good version control.
Good version control.
I like that the chat's talking about how good labeling layers are, and it's AAA, BPDC.
ASDAA. So let's, we want to export this at screen resolution, which is 720 ppi. The benefit of having it a vector is we can export it larger at 150 ppi or 300, but we don't need that, and that will kind of get in our way later. Because if we export at 150 ppi, this is going to export as 4K, and then we're going to be animating textures in 4K, and the project's going to get very, very heavy.
Right.
And if we're only going to export this for Instagram, it doesn't need to be that big.
Cool. So this is a little bit about knowing the output, which is a bit of a theme that, spoiler alert, how important planning is.
You definitely have to, if you're working on a client project, know the outputs as soon as you can. Because if a client, at the end, we need this in 4K as well, you're like, I've animated everything, and this in 1080p, this is going to be a lot of work to upscale this. Try to avoid that as much as possible.
Cool.
And let the client know beforehand. Don't wait for them to bring it up because then you're the one that's going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
They're not going to worry about that.
Totally.
All right. So let's click OK, and then we'll write a Photoshop file. Now, if we open that Photoshop file, which is one I prepared earlier, it will look like this. And we'll notice it looks the same. And on our right, we have our layers panel again from floor to ceiling of all of our different layers, which has the same naming conventions that we did in Illustrator. And from here, we are going to just organize this a little bit more. So now we have the option to have folders in Photoshop. So I'm going to select all of my cursor and chicken layers, holding Shift and selecting all of them, clicking the folder icon, which puts them in a group, and I'm going to call that chicken. And then for all the computer layers as well, click a folder. Oh, wait. I select the chicken as well. We don't need that one in there.
It's going to be a folder inside the chicken folder.
Yeah, we don't want that. All right, so now we've got a computer folder. And that only took a minute, but we can now see if we want to edit something in the computer section, we don't need to see the chicken section, and we've, reduced our, workspace by half, or increased it, reduced the layers by half. So it's a lot.
Screen real estate is very important.
It's very important, especially with when we get into After Effects, that you're going to notice a lot of panels.
It's next level.
You can really get deep. A lot of the times, I use dual monitors at home and have a Cintiq as well.
Right.
That's pretty important.
You're in the matrix at home.
Yeah, a lot of people like to have lots of layers all over the place. I kind of like one screen for most software, but get it where you can. Now, I'm also going to color these layers by right-clicking and change the color down here. I'll change the computer to blue, the chicken to orange. I don't see enough people coloring their Photoshop layers because they might not know about it, but it's really handy and just makes like eyeballing and seeing your project at a glance a lot easier. And that will come in handy, especially when we get to texturing. So to do the texturing, my process for doing this in Photoshop is to use clipping masks. So I'm going to create a new layer at the top just to show some of the brushes that I'm using. I'm going to grab my Wacom pen. I will be using a Wacom Intuos tablet. I bought this 8 years ago. So it is
workhorse.
It is a workhorse. It is still trucking along. This is the first tablet I ever bought, and it works fine. I normally use a Cintiq at home, but this is much more portable than a 24-inch big desk behemoth.
Yeah.
All right. And
Everyone's loving your haircut.
Excellent. Well, they'll notice that. It's been a long while. You can see over my tutorials over the past 4 months, like it just gets longer and longer and longer.
Right.
And I don't think there's been one with an updated haircut yet.
When did you get your haircut?
I got it cut last week to be fresh for the stream.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So
Feel so special.
for everyone out there watching.
Well, it's a big hit.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know.
Which is great.
So I've got if we open up our brushes here, I've got a little folder called Kyle BM brushes. So this is a mixture of a brush I've made and some brushes by Kyle T. Webster, who now Adobe has bought, and he creates the best Photoshop brushes. Here's one I'm going to be using a lot, which is this, brush.
It's a nice
brush bristle, and you can get these. These all come in Photoshop. These dry and wet media ones up here. I think you can download extra ones from somewhere in the Adobe ecosystem.
Yep. There's heaps of brushes.
Heaps of them. And there's this grain one that I've made. Shouldn't have that green in there. That's a monitor issue. But this is an old beast. And because I have a lot of grain in my illustration and animation, so I made my own brush. So I'm going to delete this layer, and I'm going to use some of these to texture. So let's go and select our back bottom layer, which is this bottom right down here at the back end of our computer. I'm going to select the oil bristle color, and at the moment it's going to draw it in black. And we want to draw in colors from our illustration. So I'm going to hold Option, which is going to bring up our eyedropper tool. And if we press down, we can see at the top of this circle, it shows the new color, and then the bottom is the old color, which is black. So if we move it along, we can see the different color we're selecting. So I'm going to choose this dark color here inside the monitor. And then, I'm going to create a new layer above this back bottom layer. Only one. And then I'm going to just draw a little bit of shading around here. And I'm going to go a little bit off the element so you can see, because I've drawn this just on a separate layer, all this is separated and it's not confined to this back bottom layer, which we want it to be.
You mentioned this before, but are these vector layers? It's one of the questions from the chat.
They are no longer vector layers.
Right.
Once you import these into a PSD, I think they become, they rasterize them. So if you want these to stay vector, you can import the Illustrator file into After Effects and then import the textures separately. But I don't need them to be vector layers for my animation, so I'm not worrying about it. And often if I need certain things to be vector elements, because often I'll need some things to be vector, but not everything, I'd like to just redraw it with the shape tool in After Effects.
Right.
That's easier. Or you could import the the Illustrator project and take certain pieces and vectorize them. Well, there's a plugin called Overlord where you can copy from Illustrator.
Overlord's pretty popular.
Very popular. I use that a lot.
Time saver. There was another question around that do you guys ever copy separate layers in Illustrator and then paste them as smart objects into Photoshop?
You can certainly do that. That's a great one. I think that would come as vector into After Effects. I'm not sure because I've never used that in my workflow, but you can certainly do that. I do a lot of the times. If I was to draw something, like if I was to get through texturing this halfway, and I'm like, I really want a third eye on this, on this
yeah,
guy
this
here.
two-eyed chicken drumstick just doesn't look natural. We really need a third eye.
Yeah, I'd copy those layers from Illustrator and, just go in here and, in our chicken layer, paste these as a smart object. And then I've got an extra eye here.
Right.
That I just, reposition, and that's, a pretty, that'll bring up these windows.
Kind of worked.
It's pretty good.
Yeah,
I'm like, if you see this illustration updated with a third eye, I can thank you.
Yeah, thanks, chat. Good questions.
All right. So now, back in our back using clipping masks. So I'm going to use a clipping mask to get this texture layer to be only visible on this back bottom layer here. So I'm going to hold Option. Actually, I'm going to put my pen down. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to hold Option and click on our layer here in our layers panel. I'm going to hold Option and hover over it. You can see this little icon appears, which is like kind of a square, and then it's got an L-shaped arrow pointing to the layer below. So if we click that, it becomes a clipping mask. The layer gets indented and a little arrow comes saying, I'm only affecting this layer below me. And we can see now all this texture is confined to the transparency parameters of the layer below it. So this is great for us. When I first discovered this, it was revolutionary to my workflow. So actually, let's create another layer on top and create a clipping mask. And then I'm gonna, with my pen again, create a little highlight on the right edge here. With our white layer, I'm just going to roughly get a little highlight here. And because this is, uses a clipping mask, I can just select with the arrow tool and maybe, just nudge this object left and right, which is our texture. If we want, the image to be a bit subtler, we can push it right to the edge. If we want it to be more obvious, we can edit it here. So you have a lot of options here. So I could get around through texturing the whole illustration and then think, well, my highlights to be stronger. I just have to select all of those layers and just nudge them a bit to the left.
Right.
So we've got, a lot of options. And some keen-eyed watchers may notice I have not labeled these layers. Labeling layers is probably, one thing I go on about the most in all my videos because I think it's very important. But in this situation, it's not that important.
That's the quote of the day. Labeling layers, not that important.
No.
Ben Marriott, 2019.
Don't gotta do it.
Yeah.
Just,
Why bother? So why in this case is it less important than our original very strong stance on labeling layers?
Yes. Well, in this case, it is because you're going to get less value out of labeling them here. You're going to get diminishing returns. The amount of, because I'm going to create maybe, I've created 2 texture layers for this object, and we're going to cover 20 of them. I might have 50 texture layers. And to rename them, it's going to be a lot of time, and it's not going to make things much clearer. Because at the moment, they say layer 1, layer 2. They're going to go up to layer 50. And then that's not going to be much different than them saying texture 1, texture 2.
Right.
And once we import these into After Effects, we're not going to see them as layers. We're not going to get the scenario where we have 200 layers and half of them are labeled layer or texture or anything like that. So that's not going to be an issue there. These will all be in pre-comps. And if you notice on the right, because we colored our layers blue at the beginning, our new layers are gray, so we can differentiate them there. And they're sort of indented to the right as well. So it's not going to be a trouble navigating in Illustrator or in Photoshop. And it takes a lot of time. So that's why it's okay to not label these layers, but only this once.
Only this one time.
Only this one time.
Wow. You heard it here first, folks.
That's right. And from here, my process would be to go through and texture just all of these layers. So I'd create new clipping masks for this side layer. Let's do one more quickly.
Okay,
so
cool.
See, create a clipping mask, and then just select our brush, select a color, and just, that's the wrong. Let's undo that. And then select any color you want, and add a bit of texture, get a new layer, and then if you want, and just add some highlights.
This is a silly question, but when you're adding like the highlights and do you always use a color picker so that you're limiting the amount of colors that you're using? Or do you bring in new colors during highlights?
I try to have the color palette decided beforehand.
Yeah.
Mainly because I'm not great at color picking. Like if I've got a color palette beforehand, I know, all right, these are the colors I'm limited with.
Yeah.
And you can kind of create some interesting solutions to problems when you're limited with colors, which I find, really handy. And because we're using, I think I've got 6 colors in here. I think I've got 4 shades of blue, pink, orange, white, maybe 3 shades of blue. And that's more than enough. And especially where we're texturing, because it creates a kind of gradient. Once you build these up, it's going to be a full colored thing at the end.
Yeah.
I find it's opening a can of worms. I'm like, and I could choose every color.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, but which color?
Yeah.
Well, no.
Okay.
But now I know, if I want to highlight, I can choose, if it's a blue, I can choose the lighter shade of blue. I'll choose the white for the rim lights. And if I want to get creative, I can use a pink. Maybe there's a hot pink light coming from the side. But I definitely experiment with that. Like when I was texturing this for the first time, I'm like, what if all the highlights are pink? And I'm like, no, it didn't work. But
cool.
Yeah, I definitely experiment with that.
Yeah, because one of the reasons I was asking as well was about compression, like turning things into GIFs, because if you limit your color amount, compressing it into it, you can kind of get away with going, oh, can I get away with 64 colors? Ooh,
Yeah.
can I get away with 32? And the reason that I'm asking that question is because I did that with your GIF in,
really?
in one of the emails that we sent out, turned it into a GIF.
Oh, great.
And I could compress it really far down.
Awesome. That's great.
And it would still even work in an email client. So I don't know if anyone saw that, but
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, Ben, I love you.
Oh, good. Oh, great. Yeah. No, often that comes up. Compressing to GIFs is really causes some heartache. That's
Yeah.
probably like, no, I don't want to lose all the detail.
Yeah.
But the client wants it as a GIF for some reason because this format's popular, but
Yeah.
it's not efficient for anything.
Totally. Yeah.
So-
Well, I won't show you what I ended up doing, but it looked good to me.
Yeah. No, I'm sure it should be fine. And but I try not to think about those types of restrictions. It's good to know them if you have them.
Yeah.
But I've like just make your artwork as good as possible, but I find restricting your colors that helps me with that. Helps to have a limit.
Yeah. Totally.
All right. So from here, we're going to jump forward to the whole thing textured, which looks like this. Wham. So we've got a missing eye.
That was fast.
Yeah. But we have the whole thing textured, and this took me about an hour to do. But this is the funnest part of the process to me because I feel like every stroke you make, you're improving the illustration. I'm not thinking about the composition or any of the really much of the color choices at all, or the style or what the content is. Like those are the building blocks. The foundation has been designed, and sort of the foundations are built. We're just adding some polish, some wallpaper, and making it look pretty.
And you're essentially just applying the exact same technique you showed us before, but just to the whole image. So this is our cooking show.
Yes, this is the one I prepared earlier.
This is the one we prepared earlier.
And so you can see each of these layers. Some of them have all these indented ones that are called layer, are texture layers. Some of them have got 4 textures, some only 1. It depends on which one. And I kind of just go through from the bottom to the top and select. All right, what'll this one look like? And that looks pretty good. I'll go to the next one. And then once I've done a few, I can say maybe tweak some of the other ones.
Yeah.
So do it in kind of a pass. But there's not much thinking here, and it's very fun. So this is a perfect time to put on a podcast or an audiobook or something of the sort, or maybe an Adobe live stream in the corner.
Oh yes, second screen.
All right. So from here, what I'm going to do is we need to have this ready to import into After Effects. And in Photoshop, you really don't need to do anything at all. We just save this, and After Effects speaks a lot of the same language as Photoshop, so it will import it and take care of everything. So I will jump forward into After Effects, and let's import one of our projects. So I'm going to press File. I'm going to go to File, Import, and I'm going to select one of our files here, Texture A4 Complete, which is our finished texture, and we want to make sure we click Import as not footage, but composition retain layer sizes. Because if we import as footage, it will just import as a still, and we have none of our layers, labeled or otherwise. I'm going to select OK on this menu here. It's pretty much saying the same things. And if we open up that comp that we've imported, we'll see that we've got 5 layers in our timeline here, which is the equivalent of your layer panel in Photoshop or Illustrator. And we've got a texture layer, a chicken layer, you can see if we toggle on and off, and a computer layer. And because we added those groups, those folders in Photoshop to our chicken and our computer layer, they're going to be pre-comped in After Effects, which is very handy. So if we want to go in and make changes to our computer layer, or where we go and animate it, we can see in here, we've got all of our labeled layers that came all the way from Illustrator. So we can see our back bottom layer. If we go into that, we can see it has 3 layers. So this is our first one we textured. So we've got this, square-ish shape trapezoid at the back. And then we've got our 2 textures on top called layer 54 and layer 5. So it's not that big of an issue that they're not layered here, labeled here, because I know exactly what they are.
Yeah, so you only see them when you're diving deeper into the main one.
They're not clogging up. If I had all of these layers all separated at the front, it would be a bit of a hassle to deal with.
Yeah, it's chaos.
Yeah, but it would still be that even if they were layered, even if they were labeled. So also, how After Effects interprets clipping masks is pretty interesting. It uses the Preserve Underlying Transparency feature, which is pretty underrated in After Effects. It was years before I learnt about it. So if we go to layer 5 here, actually let's go to layer 54, which is our highlight over here. Let's turn our transparency grid off so we can see it. So we've got a highlight here, but if we untick Preserve Underlying Transparency, we can see that this is a texture that extends way beyond our bottom layer here. So when we import from Photoshop, it doesn't crop or clip any of this texture at all. So we can still move this around and play with it. And if we tick this box, it acts pretty much like a clipping mask. And here we can do the same thing where we can adjust our highlight to make it more severe.
Cool.
More
And you're just
subtle.
nudging it around to move it.
Yeah, I'm just nudging this around with the old arrow keys. All right. Let me take a sip of water.
Cool. A lot of people saying amazing work.
Thank you.
In the chat.
Thank you very much, guys. It's lovely to hear. So from here, we are going to want to add some animated textures to this whole scene. Well, first, we did have a little bit of animation in this project. Now I'm going to go ahead and skip that part, but I'm going to talk a little bit about it here, so we can focus on the textures. Let's bring that back. Zoom out. So here is our animation with all the animated properties, but without any of the animated textures.
Super cool.
So our textures are static, and we've only got we've only got a few simple things animating. We've got the chicken moving up in position and the cursor moving its position as well. These are relatively simple After Effects techniques. If you've used it for a little while, you'll know how to use these. There's 2 keyframes for each one.
I noticed that, the chicken comes in at a bit of an angle to mimic the curvature of the screen.
Yes, so
which is pretty cool.
yeah, we do have a few little effects going on here that are a bit more technical, but the base animation is pretty simple stuff. So I want to show that you can create awesome looking animated work without having a huge in-depth knowledge of animation properties and fundamentals. This is just it's 2 things moving back and forth.
Right.
And I've got a little bit of frame by frame animation at the end here, which is a few dots moving down for about 8 frames. So it's not too tricky. That and the effects are maybe a little bit trickier, but just the chicken moving up and the mouse clicking it, most people should be able to handle that, or don't be too scared about it.
Right. And so I guess the purposes of this is to focus on textures. So we're gonna skip that animation part because that's a whole episode in and of itself.
It is.
And handily, we've actually done 2 episodes before, and you've done obviously so much on your channel. So I think we'll share a link to that. We have some past episodes where we've really focused on animation. So if you're watching this, you're thinking, that's what I want to learn. Check that out after the live stream today, and we go through in methodical detail.
Definitely. The previous live stream I'm on, we cover position and rotation and all of those easing and timings. You'll know way more than how to just animate these 2 little parts in there.
Yeah, super cool. So check that out. Back to textures.
Back to textures.
Awesome.
So to create some animated textures, we're going to jump back into Photoshop.
Cool.
So let's go back. And I've got a new project here, a new file, and I'm going to create 2 folders. I'm going to call one Texture 01 and the other one Brush 01, because we're going to create 2 types of textures. If we jump into our final textured illustration, we'll see we've got this one texture at the top, which is this kind of an overlay texture, which goes over the whole illustration and animation, and it's kind of these little white speckly dots. And we've also got the textured brushes that we were using beforehand, using our clipping mask on the individual layers, which act as sort of the shading to the animation.
Right.
So we're going to create an animated texture for each of those. So for the overlay texture, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import some photographs that I've taken. So I'm going to go over here and select in my assets folder. I have a few gravel textures. Now I took these with my phone in Redfern Park. I took this last week on my way to get a haircut. So, so it all links back.
You're tying it back into the haircut story.
So
my wife and I call Redfern Park Dog Park.
There's a lot of dogs. You have a great time.
Dogs.
Yeah. So while you're there, have a look at some dogs. Take some photos of the ground. You can see my shoe in this one. So like you can see, I just took this at my waist height. I took my phone out of my pocket, snapped a few pics, stepped a step to the left and the right, and took some slightly different positions of the gravel. And I just want to show that you don't need really expensive high-tech equipment. You don't need like an A3 bed scanner that scans at a trillion DPI. If you've got a smartphone, you can take photos good enough to make textured animations with. If you want to make like an A1 print or blow something up the size of a bus, you might need a high resolution scan. But for like a HD animation, these will be fine. These are 2000 pixels tall, and I think this was half the resolution that my phone took them at. So you'll be right as rain.
It's so true. It's amazing. I did a 15-minute tutorial on hardware by putting strapping my phone to one of those lamps that move across like this.
That's a great solution. Yeah.
Just strapped it in and pressed record and went, I hope this works. And just did the whole thing, edited it, published it, like super, super fast.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can actually just throw together.
Yeah, absolutely. If you said, the time it would take to leave your chair, take a photo, you don't even have to go outside, take a photo of some, the fabric on your couch, the fabric on the jumper you have. You've got lots of textures, within arm's reach. Take photos, email them to yourself. They're in Photoshop in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Like it's not an awful lot of work. So I'm going to get these 4 images in, and I'm going to first drag them into our texture folder down here. I'm going to rotate them and scale them up to fill up the screen. They're still size objects, so I'm not, increasing the size here. Still smart objects, rather.
Are you used to the automatic constraining proportions in Photoshop? Or
yes.
You're used to it now?
Of it automatically? I kind of...
You know how you used to have to hold down shift to constrain proportions when you stretch?
You know
what I'm talking about?
I didn't know that.
So if you just do it now, constrains permanently.
Oh, awesome. Oh.
So you only need to hold down Alt.
Sorry, I'll hold down Alt. But, wow. I've learned something. This is great.
I helped.
This is wonderful. All right. Use that, everyone.
There we go. I'm working for Adobe, and I still hold down Shift occasionally and say, oh no, why is it going crazy?
I only upgraded Photoshop recently, and I'm like, this isn't quite, what's going on here.
Yeah, so that's why.
You've solved my problem.
There we go. PSA to anyone out there.
Great. All right, now here, the only thing I'm going to rasterize these layers here first, so we can edit them a little more. And I am going to, the only adjustment I'm going to make is to desaturate these layers. And that is because even though they look a bit grayscale here, if I open my hue saturation panel with Command-Shift-U, let's undo that, Command-U and drag down the saturation, you can see there was quite a lot of red in that image. And I want to desaturate them in Photoshop because I want to use these assets in maybe a few other projects. So having to desaturate them again and again in After Effects might get a little bit tedious when I can just do it all at once here. And I'm going to press Command-Shift-U to just desaturate the others. And I've taken 4 photos of the gravel here. And that is because we're going to animate these textures by sort of looping them and just having a repeating loop of a sequence of four images. And I use 4 because if I were to you could use 2, which would be the minimum. And if you flick between them, this texture isn't too bad because it's, pretty fine, has a bit of a fine grain to it. But your brain can still pick up that, it's just 2 images repeating. And you want to sort of, to create a sense of immersion, you want to have as little of the person, watching it or seeing it thinking, that's the magic trick they're pulling.
Right.
That's how the trick's done. But if you have 4 images, by the time you've seen the 4th one, you've forgotten what the first one looks like. So to the viewer, it just looks like a constant stream of different textures happening. And ideally, they're not even thinking about it. Their texture's there, they're just absorbing the illustration, and this is just some nice background animations happening. They're not going, why is that flicking back and forth?
It's amazing how important these attention to detail things are in your process and in this animation process. We had Dave on recently, who I know you know quite well, and he was talking about how important those really, really small details are.
Absolutely, yeah. Dave Cochran's live stream was great. Thoroughly recommend. It's the perfect introduction to character animation. It's the best I've seen online. It was really, really, really precise, really great. Taught some great workflow. And so I chose 4 because 2 isn't enough. 3 you can kind of get away with. From this texture, I could maybe get away with. But 4 is a nice even number, and animation, often working in even numbers to repeat things, and it works good. 5, too much, don't bother. You could go to
5. Get out of here.
It'll work fine, but I don't think it's that necessary. It's only good, and it wouldn't hinder it. Just save yourself some time.
Cool.
All right. So for now, for our brush texture, we're gonna pretty much do the same process. So I'm gonna create get this brush selected, get my fill color to black, and I'm gonna draw one line down the center of the screen and kind of try to get a straight edge on this left edge. And then on the right, I'm just gonna fill it in a little bit and not worry too much about that. And now I'm gonna create 3 more layers that I'm gonna use to sort of create other versions of this texture here. So I'm gonna reduce the opacity of this one down so I can use it as a guide. And for the next one, I'm just gonna try to match this same line that I've drawn. So I'm gonna draw it all the way down and then just fill in this area. Don't really worry about this side here. And do it 2 more times. And I'm trying to match the edge here because I want to create a little bit of what we call a boil or animated boil in animation. So let's do one more, and then I'll get into the nitty-gritty of boil. All right, I think that'll be fine for us. So boil in animation refers to the sort of inconsistencies between frames in a sequence. So
Right.
if you're flicking between two frames, let's say if you were to draw a circle and you've drawn a perfect vector circle in Illustrator, and then the next frame, you draw another perfect vector circle in Illustrator. Mm-hmm. In a sequence, if that circle isn't moving, it's not going to look like it's animating. It's going to look completely static. Whereas if you drew it by hand, like in a hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation, you're not going to be able to draw an exactly perfect circle either time. So that your two circles will be slightly different, and when you play them back, they'll go like depending on how you've drawn. So that little dance between the lines where they're slightly different is what we call boil, because it's like I think because it's like when water boils, it gets boily.
Oh, right.
I believe that's why it's called that. I've just assumed that, but I think that's why it's called.
Better than what I was assuming. I was just thinking boil, like inconsistency, like a boil, like a mark or something.
Like just the skin rippling.
I like yours way more.
Well, that's what I think. All right, so why I've just tried to, I tried to match as close as I could to this bottom image because I know that by trying to match it, I'm still going to get a little bit of the way off, and I want it to boil a little bit. And a lot of hand-drawn traditional animation, you're trying to maybe reduce boil so it looks nice and smooth, like, a big fancy Disney studio animated it. But in digital animation, a lot of the time I'm trying to make it look more hand-drawn.
Right.
So
you're trying to add that imperfection.
Yeah, because we could just have a static image there and there's no boil and it's, it looks fine, but, I need a little bit of boil, adds a little bit of, a little texture to it, and you can kind of, a little more personality, and adds more animation to the line as well. So let's turn this one back up to 100%, and let's make all of these visible, and let's just save this out. So now we're going to import this into After Effects and make it loop. So let's
cool. And you just saved that as a normal Photoshop file.
Saved it as a Photoshop file.
Yep.
Because After Effects imports it, and, speaks its language very clearly. So let's go to New Brushes. I'm going to use a shortcut to import. Command I, select Text Brushes, Test Brushes, and import as Composition. Retain layer sizes. And that will have two comps here. Let's make the texture one visible because we put them in lovely little folders. So let's go into texture one and make it loop. Our comp is 4 seconds long here, which is fine for animation because our animation is that length. But let's zoom in closer, and we want to trim all of these images, all of these layers to 4 frames long. So I'm going to select them all. We're at 4 frames in, and you can see a little 5 frame marker here. And I'm going to hold Option and right square bracket, and that is going to trim them all to our playhead. So the playhead is the last frame, they're visible. And to sequence these, I'm just going to drag these over. You can use your keyframe assistant to sequence layers, but if you've got 4 layers, it's not that much trouble. And then at the end of this sequence, I'm going to press N on my keyboard to drag my work area to the end here, which means when we play it, it will loop. So if we play this back, we're a looping texture. So that looks pretty good. That's the look we want. But now we need to loop it for real, properly, instead of just in our little work area. So there's 3 options for that. You can either save it as a movie file, import it back in, and when you interpret your footage, you can set how many times it loops. You could, I could trim the comp to this duration, and then use some expressions and time remapping to get a loop into there. That was my previous method that I used to use, but you can get like drop frames, like it often doesn't loop the very last frame of, some of the layers. So it can be a bit, unintuitive how that works. So I find the good old-fashioned way is often the best. I'm just going to copy and duplicate these a whole bunch of times. So I'm going to duplicate these with Command D.
Create a stairway to heaven here.
That's right. I just keep dragging these over till they fill up the comp. What I am going to do is I'm going to recolor these first 4 layers so that if anyone, or even me in the future, opens this project, they know these 4 layers are special, which means they're the original layers. So in case we decide, one of these layers is bad, let's get rid of it, we know which one it is.
Like, hey, there's a shoe in the corner of this one.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
We can delete all the copied ones and then remove that one and, ignore that. And it doesn't take long. I'm going to duplicate and fill out this comp in a matter of seconds. And look.
While you're doing that, Kia, we'll ask that question at the end. So if you stick around to the end, we'll ask that question, and any kind of off-topic questions we'll leave until the end so we can get through everything. But that's a great question.
Sure. Now let's do the same with our other brush layer. So let's zoom right in to our 4th frame. Oops. Select all of them, copy that down, put them in a sequence. Shorten our work area. And now if we watch this brush back, we can see this is animating really nicely. We can go back and check to see if there's any frames that are maybe slightly out. These all look pretty good. But if you notice that, if one frame you drew a bit too far to the right, like this one is here, and you'll see in the motion it's a bit steppy, like this. So we can just select this, sort of eyeball it against the other frame and just nudge it back with our arrow tools. And now it looks a bit smoother. All right, so I'm gonna jump ahead to ones I've prepared earlier, and we're gonna have a look at some more brushes that I've made.
You wish you could do that in real life in animation?
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump into, brushes prepared, and I have this library of brushes, and I use the exact same process for this. So I've got 4 different texture brushes varieties. So I've got, different options. We can have, a tighter edge on the left here, a rougher, sort of looser edge here, a bit of a gradient, my grain, and then our little gravel edges as well.
Which one's your favorite? I think bottom left.
Bottom left's my favorite too.
Yeah?
Yep, for sure.
Okay.
I use that probably the majority of the time in this animation.
It's got so much character.
Yeah. Now having, setting up a little library like this is handy, not only for yourself, but in a professional workflow, if you're working with a lot of people on a lot of projects. I was working at Buck recently, freelancing there. We had a project that had a lot of textures. So I created a texture library for everyone to use because I worked with, there's a dozen animators and we all had to, animate the backgrounds of a lot of our scenes individually. So I'd have this, I'd have an After Effects project with all of these textures all set out like this. So anyone could open up the project, just select this little menu and click, oh, I want this texture for my scene, copy it, paste it into their, into their element, and all the texture would be consistent throughout the whole animation. The speed would be right, the frame rate, the scale, everything like that. It'd be super handy.
That's a great tip.
And also, I added a fill effect to all of these as well, which is going to come a little bit handy when we're eyedropping our tools, when we import it into our scene.
I think, Buck's an amazing studio. I think Tushar was saying they were really excited to see what you made while at Buck. I'm assuming that's far in the future.
I've teased I worked on some awesome projects there that I can't talk about, and that hopefully when they're out I can maybe show and say I was part of this.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I don't know when they're going to be released. So stay tuned. They'll be, if not in my Instagram feed, they'll be maybe my stories, or maybe not at all. But there's some projects I worked on that they'll be able to share.
That's funny, isn't it, when there's these huge projects and sometimes it takes a really long time for them to get out. Yeah. And even then you're like, okay, cool, yes, I did some of this.
I did some, I'm not sure. I can't post about anything else, but if you search this, my name will be in the credits
somewhere.
Probably. Yeah,
it's in there somewhere. Hey, you see that sweet texture? Ben Marriott.
Yeah, textures. Yeah, that was me. Some of them. All right. So let's copy one of these files to go and copy one of these texture comps and go add it to our animation. So I'm just going to copy this brush one loose, our favorite. And let's jump into our computer. Let's go. We'll dive deep. We've got to dive deep into our comp. So we've got our top comp, go into our computer. Let's go into our back bottom, which is the layer we're working with. And I'm going to paste that, and it drops over here. And I'm going to drag that around so we can see it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this sort of blue dark shading texture here. So I'm going to select the eyedropper here, get that blue texture. Let's zoom in, make sure we get a nice deep value there. Perfect. I'm going to rotate this by pressing R on my keyboard, bringing up the rotation property, swing this around so it kind of matches. I'm going to do my best to line it up. And then I'm going to select Preserve Underlying Transparency, which is like clipping masks in Photoshop. And now if we play it back, we've got some animated texture.
Look at that.
Look at that. I might nudge it a bit to the left because, I can't see all the frames and how far they animate. That looks pretty good. And now I can hide our existing static texture underneath, and we're left with just the animated one.
Do you always leave that layer there and just hide it, or do you delete it, or?
I always hide it because I'm paranoid, like, that I might need it later.
Right.
There's not really much reason why I would.
Yeah. You're like, I never have, but just in case one day.
Yeah, one day I'm like, I need a layer. Like if the client comes back and says, we need all those layers static. I'm like, but I've already set up and animated this thing. There's ways to get around that. So unless I need to delete it out of space, I don't really bother. Cool. Because it's not going to take up much. It's not taking up much hardware.
Right.
Capabilities. But let's be daring. Let's delete it. Now let's go back into our library, and I want to select this sort of tighter texture here for a highlight. So I'm just going to copy that, Command C, and let's go back into our back bottom layer, paste that, drag this over to the right, we line up our layer. I'm going to rotate it. Eyedropper on this white area here. Bring it over. Just nudge the rotation till it lines up. Click Preserve Underlying Transparency and delete that other layer. There we are. Let's be brave. And now I'm just going to nudge it to see what feels right. So now, because I don't have that layer, it's not as easy for me to check what the original design was. I mean, I could go back into Photoshop and, eyeball and goes, oh, it's kind of just a little bit on the edge. Or I could, make my own decisions here. That's one benefit of having them there. You can go back and reference them. Now, we've got this little comp all fully animated. Nice. If we go back up to our computer, we've got just a little piece of that going. Up at our main comp, it's starting to come together. We've got a little bit of animated texture down here. And that's the same, I would use that same process for animating each of these comps that I've got inside, each of these surfaces.
So essentially, when you're doing the textures in Photoshop, you're essentially making guides for yourself. So you're painting it kind of quickly, getting it done, and then refining it. And then when you bring it into the animation, you're saying, okay, great, now I'm going to bring in these layers are going to have consistency because it's going to be the same brushes, the same textures, same kind of beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, or same beat. That's not right. Anyway, you know what I meant. And then replicating it and removing the original kind of guides.
That's exactly right.
Super cool.
It might seem like it's going to take a long time. We've got maybe like 20 different layers here that we've got to do. It took us less than a minute to do that. There's no thinking involved. You already know what color, what shape, what brush they are. It's just a lot of copying, paste, eyedropping, moving the rotation, perfect time to, zone out and, have a second screen experience.
Second screen experience, that's right.
Yeah. And it might seem like a lot of work to get all these textures set up and for just, a little bit of animation. But once you set up these textures, this texture library, you've got that for your whole career. You can use this on any project you ever work on in the future. You've made these yourself. They're all, assets that you're free to use, especially the ones you took the photos of yourself. So, even if you may add one texture to it, if you add one texture a week, a month, you've got a big, asset library at the end that, at the end of your year, your month, whatever, that you can use with. So it's great. A bit of setup, a bit of time investment up front, but, the payoff is, pretty large. So the next project I do, just import these textures, the first, 40 minutes of this live stream, would not need to do any of that.
Right.
Just grab the textures in and, work from there. Now, we're going to animate one more texture, and that is we're going to animate one more texture, which is our sort of gravelly texture, which is going to create this sort of overlay speckle texture here. So to do that, I'm going to grab my texture light here, drag that into our comp, and I'm going to first set the blending mode to screen, which will remove all the darkness of that image. So all the black is removed, only the white stays, and then any sort of grayscale, depending on how light it is however transparent it'll be. So if it's really dark gray, it'll be a bit transparent. If it's medium gray, it'll be, like 50% transparent. And then the closer it gets to white, the more visible it is. So at the moment, this is looking really like too much is going on. Like we can't see, it's really clouding our image because there's so much white in there. So I'm going to add a curves effect. Let's spell curves properly. Curves. And I'm going to increase the contrast. The curves works exactly like it does in Photoshop, if you're familiar with it there. So I'm going to drag our black level down here, and I'm going to drag it way over to the end. So about, it's about 80% of the way through here, which will turn anything that, 85%, white will be turned, like anything that's gray will be turned to black, most of it. Only the very white stays, and then the very almost white is now visible. Let's crank it up a bit more, because I want to see like this. I want it to be pure black where I can see gaps through the illustration, through the gravel texture. So now, if I play that back, I've got the other texture visible as well underneath. So let's hide that. So now if I play that back, we've got a bit of texture going on here, which is looking a lot closer to what we want, but it doesn't quite match this texture. Because in this texture, we've got a bit of variance. We've got some areas where there's not much white at all, and then some areas where it's pretty deeply packed. So I'm going to hide that, get back to our main texture, and I'm going to fix that by adding a blur effect. So I'm going to choose a Gaussian blur. Oh, let's go back here. Gaussian blur or Gaussian, depending on your persuasion. And I'm going to chuck it above curves in my layer stack. So this will blur this texture layer, and then we'll apply this really harsh contrast to it. So I'm going to take it up from 0 blurriness up to 1. You notice there's not much happening. But if I take it up to 2, then we start to disappear a lot of our grain. Let's take this contrast down a bit to see what we're working with. So what's happening here is we are, without the blur, we've got all these pixels here. Let's actually turn this to normal mode so we can see what's going on. So with this curves layer, we've turned most of our grays into black. And then we still have these little layers here, which are, these little elements, which are, just a few pixels wide of white. But when we blur them, they turn into a darker gray. They turn into gray because the picture's next to them. So blurring will sort of just even out all the colors.
Right.
And because they're surrounded by, a dozen gray pixels, that white pixel is going to turn ever so slightly gray. The smaller it is. And then our contrast is going to crush it to black. So only the biggest white pixels, the strongest. Survival of the fittest.
Wow, survival of the fittest.
Survival of the fittest.
I didn't realize animation
speckles.
was so harsh.
It is. Look, it's unrelenting. And now if we change the mode to screen, we've got a nice speckly texture here.
That is a really cool technique.
Yeah, so that's handy thing to do, and that's just something I've learned. Ideally, I would have, found a texture that I wouldn't have to do that with, and maybe scanned in some paper or card where we've got some, some scratches or some wear through. But, you can manipulate your texture using lots of the tools in After Effects to get, the effects you want, even if, if you're not being given ideal assets, you can, you can manipulate them to a fair degree. And this kind of works on a lot of textures because pretty much any image file will have, once you up the contrast, you're going to, and you up it this much, if you remove all the black, you're going to have a little bits of speckles of white anyway. So, I've found this works well.
Yeah, it's great.
And then, so if we continue to do, fill out all of these textures for all of these layers, we end up with this final product that we saw at the beginning, where it just has a lot of life to it, and all these elements sort of, they just have a little bit of, they're just dancing. Maybe the light's flickering, maybe something, who knows? But it just makes it, a little more exciting than a static image.
Super cool.
And that, I think we're pretty much done for this project. This is my the workflow that I use in all sorts of, in my professional environments. I use this, same process at Buck, elsewhere. I use this for all my textures, and that's how it works.
So, shout out to everyone in the audience. If you do have questions, now's the time. There's a couple in there that we'll get to because we've got a little bit of time to have a chat. One of my questions was in regards to building that library you spoke about. Like, do you just create a single After Effects file and house everything in there and just save that to a cloud system somewhere and just import it that way? Or how do you save it?
That's pretty much, what I do. So I have this little folder down here, which is my brushes prepared folder.
Right.
So I could, I would create a new After Effects project that would just be my brushes. I'm not thinking about anything else in the project. Maybe have some reference files in there, so I could reference the style frames and see how the textures look. But then I'd delete everything that's not necessary. So it would only have, each composition for each brush, which have, a long stairway to heaven of copies here.
The stairway.
And then we have, I'll have maybe a couple of comps showing different libraries, like, here's all the gravel textures, here's all the brush textures, and like that. And then I just save that project, and then you can import that into any project you're working on into your animation. So, and then it just imports it as these extra folders. Like After Effects is really good at importing other projects. It just comes in as a little folder, and those elements will just be already in there. So you can
super easy.
So you can just, pick and choose, like a little pick and mix.
Awesome. There was a question in the chat. I missed one, sorry. Does holding down Shift when using a brush make the line or edge perfectly straight?
It will, yes. So let's go through and do that. And the reason I don't do that is because we'll get no boil. So I get a nice straight line here.
Right.
Then on the next time I do that, so if I do it over here, they're going to end up looking pretty much the same. There might be some slight variation, but you're just not going to get that,
right.
hand as much of a hand-drawn feel. Here it actually looks pretty good. But if you were to use, a pretty, a standard, safe, rounded brush, like that's going to look identical. You may as well draw on a rectangle to get that straight edge.
Might as well be vector, right?
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, it's a great question and brings it back to that boil.
Oh, for sure.
That boil thing. Really.
But it could probably work reasonably well because the brush is so textured, and the way depends on how the brush is formatted. Sometimes it generates a new line depending on your position in the comp.
Right.
So, depends on how much variation you have there.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Great question. where do you get your inspiration for your characters? I saw some Adventure Time in there.
Yes, definitely. I'm a big fan of Adventure Time and
Rick and Morty, maybe.
yeah, like lots of things. At the moment, I'm trying to make because I like drawing like faces on things that are meant to have faces, and I normally put like a cute face on there. And now I'm trying to make it seem a bit more grown up and mature, so I don't get pigeonholed. He just makes cute kawaii art.
Right.
Like, no. It's dark. It's evil. It's a bit messed up, and like at least to try to have a bit more. Make it a little bit sinister and balance those methods. But, I get inspiration from everywhere, really. A lot of other artists, that I follow. I can go and see, like, oh, I like how they've done that and get inspired by that way. But, yeah, just anything, a lot, really. Just, it all comes in, like the funnel of the input. And then it comes out as chickens with
And here we are.
Chickens with horns.
It's awesome. I think it was Kay. Maybe asked this question. Sorry, I forgot your name wrong. Key was it? Key T. A little while ago, slightly off topic, but do you have any advice for reducing render times for projects containing lots of moving textures? And the example was, I'm currently rendering 20-second piece with loads of MP4 textures, and it will probably take 3 hours.
3 hours for 20 seconds. Yeah, that's pretty severe. It depends, like
there's a lot of variables in there.
Lot of variables in there. Like because this project, it's fairly for like a 4-second animation. This is pretty chunky. Like you can only reduce it so much. Animated textures is something you just got to deal with because every element you've got 4 frames or something. It has to be masked out by something. So the computer to render 1 pixel of that. Your computer has to think about all the different layers and decide how it's going to show that pixel. Like, is it this layer? No, because this texture layer is on top. It's clipping this, and then that's 4 layers deep inside that. The best way is to just try to keep your project as like small and nimble as possible. Like reduce any effects you don't need. Like we've got a blur effect over the whole thing, which causes another.
Right.
Like that blur effect on top of everything probably adds maybe 10% to the render time, maybe even. Like you just got to like choose your battles, really decide what effects are necessary. I normally, on the case of unless it's really integral to like the deadline, like if your client needs updates every day and you're having to render out, if you have to render out something at 1 o'clock to show them at 5 o'clock, and you can only do half the work, you've only got half a day's worth, it might be an issue. But I think you should just work out a format like maybe a schedule and deadline that works for that.
Yeah.
But it's hard. Things just take a lot of time.
Time.
Besides like upgrading your hardware, but there's only a certain amount you can go with that before it, whenever you upgrade your hardware, you're just going to push it further. I find it's like the first week I upgraded to I got a big whiz-bang PC, and first we're like, oh, these projects that were rendering in 20 minutes, they're rendering in 20 seconds. This is great. And then my next week I'm just like, all right, just more textures.
More
just fill it up, just push it to its limit. Like so, I'd find areas where you can reduce the complexity of the project, like effects like blurs are notorious. If you're using certain type of blurs like box blur or camera blur are more intensive. They look more realistic and nice.
Right. But
Gaussian blur is probably the quickest, fastest way to do things like that. So there might be some effects you could maybe reduce. Oh, also, actually, one thing, pre-comp a lot of your layers. So if you're finished with, say my client is happy with, I've animated the computer, client's got no problem with the textures. I could get this computer layer, and I could just render this computer layer out, this file here, as either as a PNG sequence or just as a movie file, and then import that back in, and then just drop the movie file on top and like hide this layer.
Oh, cool trick.
So that way the when your machine's rendering it, it's like, so here, I've already got this mask here, it's only thinking about the chicken. It doesn't care what the computer's doing, it's just playing a footage file underneath. So if you can pre-render certain elements, like backgrounds are great for that, because they often things don't need to interact. Like here it's pretty static, so nothing's really interacted with the computer. It's just sat there doing nothing. So if I pre-rendered the background layer, it might take the render time down by half even. So that's actually a good tip. Use that. That might be handy, but sometimes it might not. It depends on the situation. That might not be appropriate for your project. Like there might not be anything that's you can do that with.
It's good advice. Things to try for sure. And Kia, like the car. Thank you. I like that phonetic. I wish I had that for. I wish I had that for everybody. I'm sure I pronunciate people's names incorrectly. So a couple more questions. Is that displacement on the monitor when the drumstick comes in animated? So we talked about that earlier, and we are dipping back into the animation. So yeah, the displacement, so the wave.
Yes, sure. So when the chicken comes in, you can see he kind of, let's solo this chicken layer here. Oh no, that's not him. He's the blurry one. So you can see as it comes in.
So sleepy.
So he's sleepy, and the eyes roll in darkly. But yeah, you can see it pushes out of the right here. So I'm using a displacement map for this.
Right.
So if we turn on so I have an effect applied called displacement map, and I've set the displacement map layer to this comp that I've called displacement map. So what this does is it will push, I've set it to push the horizontal distance of this, of the chicken. So it'll manipulate the horizontal distance, a maximum of 25 pixels based on the displacement map. So that means my displacement map that I've got here looks like this. So if an area is black, it'll push the pixels 25 pixels to the right. If it's gray, it will leave them where it is.
Oh.
If it's white, it'll push them 25 pixels to the left.
Wow.
So I've just got a gray fill that's 50% gray, and then I've got a little a gradient at the bottom here. So at the bottom, it pushes things it'll push them 25 pixels wide here, and a little less here. And then by the time it's gray, it's not pushing it anywhere.
That is cool.
And then I've just animated some other gray lines going down here. So that means if you look back here, I've got it slightly visible. You can see these gray lines go down. Where the dark lines are, it pushes the black will push the pixels of that layer to the right over a little bit. So that's how that works. So that's a bit of a trickier, more complicated thing to,
Yeah, that is super cool.
Let's explain. Yeah, that's how that works.
Couple more. Ben was asking, do you have a library of all these assets you've made? We kind of talked about that. You do.
Yeah, I
Create a whole library for yourself.
Yeah, I think if you look in here, I've got a folder. Like you'll see my true organization here. I've got a folder called resources, and I've got textures, and I've got some texture packs that I've bought, like the grit kit and looper pack. But I've also got paintbrush textures. These ones that I've painted. These ones aren't labeled, so I've got this is one that I use all the time to overlay things. I've just got brushes like these are things like I created these in 2012. So
oh wow, getting your value out of that.
Some of them are very specific, like there's these shapes I wouldn't need much use for. Like this one at the bottom right, for an illustration I did of a Gyarados, the Pokemon. So if you recognize it's a Gyarados shape.
Oh wow.
So and those were little Magikarps on the floor. But some of them, these ones are very generic. So I've just got lots of all different opportunities. So if I need a texture, I can go into here, grab these, especially this one. This was a person's head upside down. That was their collar, I think. But yeah, lots of different variants. Like this one, you got a lot of brush here. Cool. This one's a bit more scratchy and stuff like that. So yeah, I have a little library here. They're all my flat ones, and then I've got special ones for ink. Yeah, I got lots.
Heaps. Yeah, that's super cool. That's really good to see. Sagat was asking, second last question. Sagat was asking, what's your main go for inspirations, be it color or character or animation?
My main.
So I guess just any. It's pretty wide out.
I don't know if I have a super specific one that I can point to. Adventure Time certainly is one. I really like the tone of Adventure Time.
Yeah.
Like I love how mature and dark it can be for a really friendly kids.
They get away with quite a bit.
They get a lot with great, and it's great because it's perfect for it's not too scary. It's got a lot of maturity to them, to the images. So it's a cute thing, but the concept or there's some darkness behind it. That's like, oh, that's below the surface. This isn't as friendly and shiny or just straight black and white as it can be.
Yeah.
So that I really enjoy, but yeah, a lot of the time I'll draw something and just think, oh, what's the most ridiculous thing I can add to this to make it interesting, and so this one I just started off with a chicken. My original intention was just to animate a chicken coming up on the computer, and I thought, I'll give it a face. That'll be weird. And I've learned some new tricks. Like now, my new favorite thing is I make them with the eyes. I offset the pupil slightly so it looks a bit derpy, like eyes are going in either direction.
Right.
So they're close to the edge of the eye. And one thing I discovered while animating this is the eyes rolling in from the top. I think it's really cool and dark.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that a lot more. Also, coloring the eyes as well, like not white. I saw, actually, art director who works at Buck, Lucas Brooking, one of his illustrations I saw had these really bright fluorescent yellow for the white of the eyes. And I thought, that looks really dark and cool. I'm always looking for little moments like, how can I add a bit of more coolness to my art?
Nice.
It's got a cute little face. I'll give it, give it fangs. fangs first of all.
Fangs,
Horns. I've given it a bit of a drippy, you know, it could be either blood or drool. Eyes coming in from the top, and yeah, you know, color in the eyes, and you know, some little you know, the bags in the eyes sort of half open or closed, like it's, you know, sleepy or, you know, intoxicated or anything like that. Those are my little methods.
You're super cool.
To do that. So I get, you know, inspiration, a few things like that. I'll see someone else's work and go, oh, that's a good way they've achieved something, and, you know, take that and, you know, put that in your pocket for later.
Nice. You're like, oh, I like that. I'm going to do something with that later. And Amanda was just asking, last question, are you freelancing now, and how did you find work when you started?
Yeah, so I'm
Great question.
freelancing now. I started freelancing February last year, so it's been maybe 18 months. I'd highly recommend a book called The Freelance Manifesto by Joey Corriman, who runs the School of Motion, which is a great resource for learning motion design. But here's a book. I think it's, you know, $15 for the paperback, $10 on a Kindle. It's pretty quick. I read it in like 2 days. Like it's not like it's a short book, but like it's really good. Like I was, you know, really keen to read it. And a podcast interview he did was kind of what inspired me to go freelance, because it talks through his method of, you know, contacting agencies. And like, because, you know, the main sort of idea is like everyone's looking for freelancers. As a freelancer now, like as soon as I get into an agency, people are like, do you know any other freelancers? Like we need, there's way more work than there are freelancers to go. Well, certainly there's way more work than there are good, reliable freelancers to go around.
Yes.
So if you're good and reliable, if you label your files,
Right.
you know, like they'll love you, and, you know, they'll hire you back. But yeah, in this book it talks about the method of, you know, approaching these studios, how to find out what studios there are. Like some tips I use, like I have notifications on the Loop, which is a creative job board in Australia. But you can set one up on Seek, whatever job board you have. I still have a weekly notifications of all the graphic design positions going. So that lets me know, because every week, you know, there's 5-10 new graphic design positions going in Sydney, and I'm not looking for a graphic design position or a full-time position, but I know if a company is looking to hire a graphic designer, there's a chance they're making original art. There's a good chance they might need that animated. Yeah. If they're just hiring a graphic designer, they probably don't have a motion designer on staff, so it's probably more affordable for them to offshoot a freelancer. So that's a method I use. So like,
nice, I like that.
So I've created like a spreadsheet. Well, there's a company I know makes creative things in the city, and I just keep adding to that spreadsheet. I'm like, here's a company that might be interested in this, and then, you know, I got some time, send off some emails to, you know, a few people saying, hey, I'm available. Here's the work that I do, and yeah, that's kind of a way. But this book goes into a lot more depth of those types of techniques.
That's cool.
And amazingly, like, you learn there's companies that you've never even heard of. That, like, there's thousands of like creative companies in just in Sydney.
Yeah, and those are just creative companies as well. People often forget that there's corporate companies and then finance and then
every company,
council and stuff. It's like, I don't want to work for them. It's like, but often they'll have their entire teams.
Yeah, they'll have in-house
need
teams.
work.
I think that's
constantly need work as well.
I think that's the industry is going that way. There's less, you know, there's a few boutique studios that are gonna last, but, you know, larger, you know, creative, you know, studios that, you know, just service a client. Like a client gets big enough, they're like, well, we could just hire 3 designers, a motion designer, an art director.
There's an ebb and flow, I think, of both. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, like, but yeah, if you're searching people, both of them are going to be looking for them on job boards. So, you know, just find as many as you can, create a good portfolio, act professional, and contact people, and slowly, you know, you're going to get a lot of people not interested, like people aren't looking for stuff. Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of people, you know, people don't hire, people, you know, will get no messages back from a lot of them. Like it's, you know, a numbers game. You approach, you know, 100 people, you'll get 10 emails back. Most of them aren't looking for anything in the moment, but no one is annoyed that someone's emailed them. These people are getting 50 emails like every hour or so. Like, no, you don't go on a blacklist like, this person annoyed me by sending me their reel. I'm never gonna hire them again. They're like, oh, I'm not hiring a motion designer. You know, cool reel. Thanks for sending. That's the worst case scenario.
I actually got onto a blacklist once.
Oh really?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you offline. It is possible.
All right.
But yeah, not the way that you're describing to do it.
Don't pester anyone. Yeah, a polite email saying I'm available for work. No one, like, people want to see new interesting work. So as many people you can get to see your work, you know, that'll just keep rolling over. And at the start, it's hard when you're freelancing because you don't have backlog of clients. You know, worked a full-time position, so I had contacts in the industry, and but yeah, it's hard. Save up a buffer of money so you can live off for a few months, and just start hitting the old email pavement, knocking on doors, knocking on email doors, showing you real.
It's good advice. And as Ben said, same with dating. That's right. And that is the end of this episode of Adobe Live. Thanks so much for the questions. Some really great questions in there. And thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us again.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for everyone in the chat. It was, great. And, find me on my YouTube. Feel free to ask me any questions there, on my Instagram, and I'll get back to you.
And we'll make sure we share links to Ben here in the live chat, and also on YouTube. If you're looking for Ben, just check down below and let us know what you think of the episode and what you want to hear from us in the future.
Please.
Thank you. See you later.
See ya.